I never expected that a catastrophic plumbing failure would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when my ceiling collapsed and my neighbor offered me his spare room. It turns out, sometimes the universe has to tear your life apart just to put it back together the right way. My name is Miles, and up until that point, my life was a study in carefully curated solitude. At 28, I worked from home as a freelance copy editor, a job that suited my temperament perfectly. My world was contained within the four walls of my second-floor apartment, a space filled with books, the quiet hum of my laptop, and the predictable rhythm of my own routines. I didn't dislike it. There was a comfort in the order, a safety in the silence. But it was a silence that sometimes grew too loud, echoing a loneliness I rarely admitted even to myself. My apartment building was an old brick affair, the kind with character and questionable wiring. It had settled into its own personality over the decades, groaning in the winter and smelling of damp earth after a summer rain. My neighbors were mostly transient students or young professionals I'd exchange brief, polite nods with in the hallway. I knew them by their habits. The woman in 3B who burned incense that smelled like sandalwood, the guy on the first floor who practiced his saxophone every Tuesday at 7. And then there was Caleb. Caleb lived in the apartment directly across the hall from me. He was a presence, even in his absence. I'd hear the solid, confident tread of his work boots in the mornings and the soft click of his door in the evenings. He was a carpenter, or a furniture maker, or something that involved wood and skill and physical effort. He often came home with a fine layer of sawdust clinging to his dark hair and the shoulders of his flannel shirts, and he smelled of cedar and something else, something uniquely him. From my window, which overlooked the small parking area behind our building, I had a perfect view of his truck. I watched him more than I should have. I saw him load beautifully crafted pieces of furniture, a sleek coffee table, a sturdy-looking bookshelf, into the back, his movements economical and strong. He had this look of intense focus when he worked, his brow furrowed slightly, his jaw set. And then it would break, and he'd smile at something on his phone or laugh with someone on a call, and the transformation was dazzling. He was, in my quiet and observant world, a figure of unattainable perfection. He seemed so grounded, so effortlessly masculine and self-assured. I built an entire narrative for him in my head. A girlfriend who was just as cool and earthy as he was, a life full of boisterous friends and weekend camping trips. He was from a world I felt I could only watch from behind glass. We'd passed each other dozens of times, sharing the same stale hallway air, but our interactions were limited to a quick, hey, or a nod. My heart would still perform a ridiculous little flutter every single time. It was a crush, pure and simple, one I kept safely tucked away in the part of my brain reserved for impossible things. The ordinary world, as it turned out, was built on very old, very tired plumbing. The inciting incident wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a slow, insidious drip. I woke up one Tuesday morning to the sound of it, a rhythmic plink plink plunk that seemed to be coming from inside my own head. It took me a moment to realize it was real. I followed the sound to my small living room, and my stomach dropped. A large, ugly brown stain had blossomed on the ceiling overnight, and at its center, a fat drop of water was gathering, hesitating, and then falling to the floorboards. I put a bucket under it and called Mr. Henderson, our long-suffering building manager. He arrived an hour later, took one look at the stain, and sighed the sigh of a man who had seen it all before. He went upstairs to the apartment of the incense-burning woman in 3B, and a few minutes later, the dripping slowed to a stop. I felt a wave of relief. A simple fix, I thought. I was wrong. What started as a stain became a structural crisis. Mr. Henderson returned with a grim look on his face. "Bad news, Miles," he'd said, his voice gravelly. "It's an old galvanized pipe. Corroded straight through. It's not just a leak. The whole section in the ceiling is shot. We're going to have to tear out most of this drywall to replace it." The days that followed were a blur of noise and dust. Workers in heavy boots trooped in and out, laying down plastic sheeting that crinkled with every step. They cut a massive, gaping hole in my living room ceiling, exposing a grim network of ancient pipes and dark wooden beams. The air filled with the smell of damp plaster and mildew. My sanctuary, my quiet, orderly world, had been violated. It was impossible to work, impossible to think. The final blow came on Thursday afternoon. One of the plumbers, a burly man named Gus, informed me they'd found more corrosion than expected. Gonna be at least another week. He grunted, not making eye contact. And we gotta run these industrial dehumidifiers round the clock to prevent mold. They're loud. I stood in the middle of my chaotic apartment, feeling a profound sense of despair. I had no family in the city. My few friends lived in tiny apartments with no spare space. A hotel was an expense I couldn't really afford. I was standing in the hallway, having this very conversation with Mr. Henderson, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, when a door opened. Caleb stepped out of his apartment. He was holding a bag of trash, and he paused when he saw us, his eyes taking in my defeated posture and Mr. Henderson's apologetic shrug. I felt a flush of embarrassment, being seen in such a state of disarray by him, of all people. "Everything all right?" Caleb asked, his voice deeper than I had imagined. Mr. Henderson explained the situation, painting a bleak picture of noise, dust, and general uninhabitability for the foreseeable future. I just stood there, staring at a scuff mark on the floor, wishing the ground would swallow me whole. I heard Caleb shift his weight. "Well, that's rough," he said. There was a pause. I braced myself for a sympathetic platitude before he would continue on his way. But that's not what happened. "Listen," he said, and I looked up. He was looking directly at me, his expression surprisingly earnest. "I have a spare room. It's not much, just has a bed and a dresser, but it's clean and it's quiet. You're welcome to use it until they get your place sorted out." I blinked. The world seemed to stop for a second. The hallway, with its peeling paint and flickering fluorescent light, felt like a stage. Caleb, my untouchable, sawdust-covered neighbor, was offering me a room in his home. It was so unexpected, so far outside the realm of possibility I had constructed, that I couldn't form a coherent thought. "Oh," I said, my voice a weak croak. I couldn't." "Why not?" he asked, a small, encouraging smile touching his lips. "It's just sitting empty. And those dehumidifiers are no joke. You won't get any sleep. Seriously, it's no trouble at all." Mr. Henderson clapped me on the shoulder. "Sounds like a great solution to me," he said, clearly relieved to have the problem taken off his hands. My mind was racing, a chaotic mix of anxiety and a wild, terrifying flicker of hope. Living with him? Sharing a space with him? It was too much. But what was the alternative? A week in a noisy, dusty, damp apartment, or draining my savings on a sterile hotel room? I looked at Caleb again. He was still watching me, waiting, his gaze steady and kind. There was nothing in his expression but simple, genuine concern. My caution was screaming at me to say no, to retreat into my disrupted but familiar solitude. But another, quieter voice whispered that this was a lifeline. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Positive," he said, his smile widening slightly. "We're neighbors, right? It's the least I can do." And so, with a mumbled thank you and a heart hammering against my ribs, I agreed. I agreed to step out of my carefully controlled world and into his. I packed a bag with my laptop, a week's worth of clothes, and a sense of profound disbelief. That evening, I walked across the 10 feet of hallway that had always felt like a mile, and Caleb held the door open for me. As I stepped inside, I had a dizzying feeling that I wasn't just entering an apartment. I was crossing a threshold into a different life. The first thing that struck me about Caleb's apartment was the smell. It smelled like his truck, like his clothes, that warm, clean scent of freshly cut wood. The second thing was how beautifully put together it was. My own place was a comfortable clutter of books and papers, but Caleb's was a testament to his craft. The floors were a dark, polished hardwood. The coffee table was a single, magnificent slab of live-edge walnut, and a set of floating shelves held a few well-chosen objects and a surprising number of plants. It was minimalist but warm, masculine but thoughtful. It was, I realized with a pang, exactly the kind of place I would have imagined for him, only better. The first night was a ballet of awkward politeness. I felt like an intruder, hyper-aware of every sound I made. I put my things in the spare room, which was just as he'd described, simple, clean, with a comfortable-looking bed and a small window that faced the street. He showed me where the towels were, told me to help myself to anything in the kitchen, and then we both sort of stood in the living room, unsure of what to do next. "So, do you want to order a pizza or something?" he asked, breaking the silence. To commemorate your temporary eviction. I managed a small laugh. Sure, pizza sounds good. We ate sitting on his comfortable leather sofa, the pizza box balanced on the stunning walnut table between us. We made small talk. He asked about my work, and his eyes didn't glaze over when I explained the finer points of the Chicago Manual of Style. I asked about his, and he talked about the different kinds of wood he worked with, the satisfaction of taking a rough piece of lumber and turning it into something beautiful and functional. He spoke with a quiet passion that was captivating. Slowly, over the next couple of days, the initial awkwardness began to fade, replaced by a comfortable rhythm. I would set up my laptop at his kitchen table in the mornings while he got ready for work. He was not a morning person, moving with a slow, rumbling grace until he'd had at least 2 cups of coffee. And he insisted on making one for me, too. Can't have you editing on subpar fuel, he'd grumble, handing me a steaming mug. It was a small gesture, but it felt strangely intimate. The real shift happened on the 3rd evening. I was finishing up some work when he came home, looking more tired than usual. He dropped his keys on the small entryway table he'd built and sighed. I noticed he was carrying a large, leather-bound sketchbook. Long day? I asked. The usual, he said, but then he came over to the kitchen table and opened the sketchbook. Just trying to work out a design that's fighting me. I leaned over, curious. The page was filled with elegant, precise drawings of a chair. There were notes in the margins, calculations, and detailed sketches of the joints. It wasn't just a functional drawing. It was beautiful. His lines were clean and confident. It was artistry. Wow, I said, genuinely impressed. You design all your own stuff? A faint blush appeared on his cheeks. Yeah, I mean, that's the goal. I do a lot of standard carpentry to pay the bills, cabinets, and things. But this is what I actually want to do. Start my own studio. Just custom designed pieces. He seemed almost embarrassed, as if he were admitting a secret weakness. Caleb, these are incredible, I said, pointing to a particularly graceful curve on the chair's back. You're a real artist. He looked down at the page, then back up at me, and he gave me a small, shy smile that was completely different from the easy, confident one I was used to seeing. Thanks, Miles, he said softly. Not many people get it. They just see a chair. In that moment, the image I'd built of him, the rugged, effortlessly cool carpenter, cracked open, revealing someone more complex and vulnerable underneath. He wasn't just a guy who was good with his hands. He was a creator, a dreamer, with insecurities and ambitions just like anyone else. It made him seem suddenly, breathtakingly real. And my quiet, impossible crush intensified into something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next morning, the air between us felt different, charged with a new kind of awareness. The small talk was replaced by easier conversation. He told me about his dream of buying a plot of land outside the city and building a workshop. I told him about the novel I secretly wanted to write one day. We were sharing more than just an apartment now. We were sharing pieces of ourselves. It was during that conversation, standing in the kitchen as the morning sun streamed through the window, that it happened. A small, almost imperceptible moment that landed in my chest like a stone. We were both reaching for the sugar bowl on the counter at the same time. It was a clumsy, uncoordinated movement, and the backs of our hands brushed against each other. His skin was warm and slightly calloused. The contact lasted for no more than a second, but it sent a startling jolt of electricity straight through me. It was so unexpected, so potent. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. Sorry, I mumbled, my face suddenly hot. No, my bad, he said, his voice a little rough. He grabbed the sugar, but his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. And in that glance, I saw it. A flicker of something. Surprise, confusion, maybe something more. It was there, and then it was gone, shuddered away as he turned back to his coffee. But I had seen it. I spent the rest of the day replaying that tiny, insignificant touch, dissecting that fleeting look. It was probably nothing. A complete projection of my own feelings. Right? But the warmth of his hand lingered on mine, a phantom touch that I could feel for hours. My carefully constructed defenses were crumbling, and the hope that had been a dangerous flicker was threatening to become a flame. The turning point arrived, as these things often do, not with a grand gesture, but with a pathetic achoo. It started with a tickle in my throat on Saturday morning, which I stubbornly ignored. By evening, I was surrendering to the inevitable. The stress of the apartment disaster, the lack of sleep, the general emotional upheaval, it had all caught up with me. I had a full-blown, miserable cold. I tried to quarantine myself in the spare room, insisting I was fine, but Caleb wasn't having it. He was surprisingly and unnervingly nurturing. He appeared at my door with a glass of orange juice, then later with a bowl of soup that tasted suspiciously homemade. He checked on me every hour or so, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You look terrible," he said, standing in the doorway that evening, his arms crossed. "Thanks. I feel it." I croaked from my cocoon of blankets. My head was pounding, my body ached, and a fever was making me feel floaty and strange. Later that night, it got worse. The fever spiked, and I started shivering, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that shook the entire bed frame. I was wrapped in 2 blankets, but I couldn't get warm. I felt utterly miserable and pathetic. I must have made some sort of noise, a whimper or a groan, because a few moments later, my door creaked open. "Miles." Caleb's voice was a soft whisper in the dark. "You okay?" "Jay, just sea cold." I managed to chatter, my teeth clicking together. He came into the room and switched on the small bedside lamp. The soft light illuminated his worried face. He put the back of his hand to my forehead, and his touch was blessedly cool. "You're burning up," he murmured. He hesitated for a second, biting his lower lip as if debating something. "Here," he said, making a decision. "Move over." I was too feverish and confused to process what he was saying. "What?" "Just move over," he repeated gently. I shifted dumbly towards the wall. He walked around to the other side of the bed and, to my utter astonishment, lay down on top of the covers beside me. He was fully dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants, and he kept a careful distance at first. "Sometimes body heat helps," he said, his voice low and a little uncertain. "My mom used to do this for me when I was a kid and got sick." My shivering was so violent I could barely speak, but I was acutely aware of him. The solid warmth of his body, just inches from mine. The clean scent of his soap. He was quiet for a moment, and I think he could tell it wasn't working. The tremors continued to rack my body. Then, with another small hesitation, he shifted closer. "This is going to sound weird," he whispered, "but just trust me." He gently turned me onto my side, so my back was facing him. Then he lay down behind me, fitting his body along the length of mine. He draped an arm over my waist, and then he carefully, gently, pulled me back against his chest. The world stopped. My shivering didn't cease immediately, but it was muffled by the sheer, overwhelming reality of what was happening. I was being held by Caleb. My head was tucked just under his chin, my back pressed firmly against the solid wall of his chest. I could feel the steady, reassuring thump of his heart against my shoulder blades, a slow, strong rhythm. He was so warm. It was a deep, penetrating heat that began to seep into my bones, chasing away the chill. It was the most intensely intimate experience of my life. There was nothing sexual about it. It was an act of pure, unadulterated care. But the feeling of his arm around me, his breath stirring the hair at the back of my neck, the simple, profound comfort of his presence, it undid me completely. My overthinking brain, for once, went completely silent, replaced by pure sensation. The shivering subsided, replaced by a different kind of tremor, a deep, internal hum of awareness. I lay there, held securely in his arms, listening to his quiet breathing, and I felt something shift inside me. It was the feeling of a lock clicking open, of a wall I hadn't even realized was there finally coming down. I felt safe. I felt cared for. And as I drifted off into a feverish but peaceful sleep, the last conscious thought I had was that I never wanted him to let go. I woke the next morning to an empty bed. The sun was streaming through the window, and for the first time in 24 hours, my head felt clear. The fever had broken. I sat up, the blankets pulled around my waist, and saw a glass of water and 2 aspirins on the bedside table. A small, folded note was propped against the glass. "Had to run to the workshop for a bit. There's soup in the fridge. Text me if you need anything." See, his handwriting was a strong, clean script, just like his drawings. I touched the note, tracing the letters of his name. My memory of the previous night came flooding back, vivid and overwhelming. The feeling of his arms around me, the sound of his heartbeat. My cheeks flushed hot. Physically, I felt a million times better. Emotionally, I was a wreck. The atmosphere in the apartment when he returned that afternoon was thick enough to chew. We were back to the awkward ballet of our first night. But this time it was worse, freighted with the weight of unspoken things. He asked how I was feeling. I said I was much better and thanked him profusely for taking care of me. He just shrugged, a blush creeping up his neck, and mumbled, "No problem." He busied himself in the kitchen. I retreated to the spare room. We avoided eye contact. We made pointless small talk about the weather. Every accidental glance felt charged. Every word seemed to have a dozen hidden meanings. He was keeping his distance, a careful, deliberate space between us at all times. And it was killing me. My mind went into overdrive. I replayed the event from every conceivable angle. It was just an act of kindness. He'd said it himself. It was something his mom used to do. It was practical. I was shivering, and he provided a logical solution. To him, it probably meant nothing more than that. He was just a fundamentally decent human being. But my heart wasn't buying it. There was the hesitation before he did it. The way his voice had been so soft in the dark. The memory of his steady breathing, the solidness of him. I had felt something in that embrace, a current of emotion that went beyond simple platonic care. Had I imagined it? Had my fever-addled brain invented a connection that wasn't there? I tortured myself with the possibilities. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe he realized it had been too intimate, that he'd crossed a line, and now he was trying to backpedal, to re-establish a comfortable, neighborly distance. The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. I had probably made him deeply uncomfortable. The kindness he had shown me was now the source of this excruciating tension. I became convinced that I had ruined everything. Our easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by this stilted, careful politeness. The only solution, I decided, was to remove myself from the situation. I called Mr. Henderson and told him I was ready to move back into my apartment, even though he advised against it. "The drywall is patched, but the paint is still damp," he warned. "And it's going to smell like primer for a few days." "I don't care," I told him. "I just need to be back in my own space." I needed to escape Caleb's apartment. I needed to escape the hope that had taken root in my chest, because the possibility that it was all in my head was far more painful than the quiet loneliness I had known before. Fear of rejection was a powerful motivator, and it was screaming at me to run back to the safety of my own four walls, even if they smelled of paint. I started packing my few belongings, my heart feeling heavier with every folded shirt. The day before I was scheduled to move back across the hall, the tension in the apartment had reached its peak. We'd barely spoken more than a few words to each other all day. I was in the spare room, zipping up my duffel bag, when I heard a soft knock on the open door. I looked up. Caleb was standing there, leaning against the doorframe, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. He looked incredibly nervous. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Got a second?" My heart started to pound. This was it. The "let's just be friends" speech. Or worse, the "please don't misinterpret my kindness" speech. I braced myself. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual as I sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't come into the room. He just stayed in the doorway, chewing on his lower lip. "So, I know I've been acting weird the last couple of days," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "And I'm sorry about that. I haven't known what to say." I waited, my hands clenched into fists on my lap. "Listen, Miles," he said, finally looking at me, his gaze direct and intense. "When I offered you this room, it wasn't just because your apartment was flooded. I mean, it was, but that wasn't the only reason." He took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into deep water. "The truth is, I've been noticing you for a while. For months, actually. In the hallway, out by the parking lot. I thought you were amazing. But I'm not good at this stuff. I never know what to say. I just kept hoping I'd run into you at the mailboxes and think of something brilliant, but I never did." My brain struggled to keep up. He had noticed me? He thought I was amazing? It didn't seem possible. "When I heard what happened with your apartment," he continued, his words coming faster now, "it felt like, I don't know, a sign or something. A stupid, dramatic sign. It was this opportunity, and I knew if I didn't take it, if I didn't say something, I would regret it forever. So I asked you to stay here." He finally pushed himself off the doorframe and took a tentative step into the room. "And it's been even better than I imagined. Getting to actually talk to you. And then you got sick." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure anxiety. "The other night, When I held you. That wasn't just about keeping you warm. God, that sounds so creepy saying it out loud. But I wanted to be close to you. And it felt right. And then the next morning I completely freaked out. I thought I'd overstepped, that I totally misread everything and made you uncomfortable. A wave of dizzying, intoxicating relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me laugh. He'd felt it too. He had been overthinking everything, just like me. He had been just as scared. I finally found my voice. You didn't, I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. You didn't misread anything. And you didn't make me uncomfortable. I stood up, closing the small distance between us. Caleb, I've been watching you too. From my window. For a very long time. I confessed it all. My assumptions, my ridiculous crush, the way my heart hammered when he said hello in the hall. When our hands touched in the kitchen. I thought I was going to pass out. A slow smile spread across his face. A smile of pure, unadulterated relief. The tension that had been stretched between us for days finally snapped. You're kidding me, he breathed, a small, happy laugh escaping him. All this time, I confirmed, smiling back. He took another step, so he was standing directly in front of me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. So, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. Can I try something? Something I probably should have just done the other night instead of chickening out the next day. I didn't need words. I just nodded, my eyes locked on his. He raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing against my cheek, his thumb stroking my jawline. The callous skin was a startlingly wonderful sensation. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a kiss full of all the words we hadn't been able to say, full of weeks of unspoken longing and days of excruciating tension. It was confident and sure, and it felt like coming home. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. So, he whispered, a grin in his voice. I'm guessing you'll be canceling that moving plan. Consider it canceled, I whispered back, and then I pulled him in for another kiss. I didn't move back into my apartment that week or the week after. The painters finished their work, the smell of primer faded, and my landlord called to say it was ready, but my duffel bag remained in Caleb's spare room. We decided, mutually, that we weren't in any rush to put a wall between us again. The spare room became my room, and his apartment slowly, beautifully, became our home. Those first few weeks were a revelation. We fell into a new kind of rhythm, one built on shared mornings and late-night talks. I learned that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was concentrating on a design. He learned that I need absolute silence when I'm editing a difficult manuscript. We went on dates, to a noisy, crowded pub where he introduced me to his friends, and to a quiet, dusty used bookstore that was my personal version of heaven. I helped him put together a business plan for his workshop, my editing skills finally useful for something other than correcting comma splices. He, in turn, built a custom bookshelf for my apartment, for when I eventually moved my things back in. A gorgeous piece of dark cherry wood that fit perfectly into a previously awkward nook. It was his first official piece from the future Caleb Hale design studio, and seeing it in my space felt like a promise. A few months later, on a rainy Tuesday night, we were in my apartment. It was finally feeling like my own again, but better, because now it was filled with traces of him. The bookshelf, a coffee mug he'd left behind, the faint scent of cedar that clung to the throw blanket on the sofa. Caleb had brought over a bottle of red wine and was expertly working the corkscrew. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to me, our fingers brushing. This time, neither of us pulled away. He clinked his glass against mine. To faulty plumbing, he said, his eyes sparkling with amusement. I laughed. To faulty plumbing, I echoed. The best thing that ever happened to me. We stood by the window for a while, watching the rain streak down the glass, the city lights blurring into soft focus. He slid his arm around my waist, pulling me close, and I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace that was so deep and profound it felt like it had settled right into my bones. It's funny how life works, isn't it? You build these walls around yourself, these routines and safe distances, and you think you're in control. You watch the world from a window, believing some people, some feelings, are meant to stay on the other side of the glass. But you never know. You never know when a random, chaotic event will come along and tear a hole in your ceiling, forcing you to step out into the hallway and into the life that was waiting for you all along. Sometimes, you just have to let the walls crumble to find where you truly belong.